A child might also become familiar with the hymns. In this way, they would be familiar with the hymn books themselves, the words and the letters that are written upon the sheets, the numbers that are placed above that indicate which book they're looking at and which song they're reading, and listening to the songs themselves. Much like the scriptures and the prayers, listening to the songs in church can incorporate recognizing sounds and letters and the words that might have meaning, even if they don't know the words and the meanings themselves. This also includes speaking the words they may not know and forming letter sounds that they may not know, simply because they're listening to them and it's being heard. Similarly, when they're looking at the piece of text, even if they don't understand the symbols for the music, they still recognize the words, as that is how they are able to sing the songs. The hymn book itself includes many letters and words that children aren't familiar with, much like books that they would incorporate into the classroom setting that they may not understand. In addition to this, the numbers that are placed overhead that indicate which page you're on have numbers and recognition that the students might have to look at. They might not understand the numbers themselves, but by recognizing that the number has meaning to the page they're on, they're connecting a number to an idea. The final thing that might be incorporated into a community such as church is prayers given in church. Prayers given in church may incorporate words and ideas that the students are not familiar with, but because they're listening to them, they become familiar with them and assign meaning to those letters, sounds, and words. This requires the literacies of listening and recognizing, thinking and speaking, and assigning meaning to sounds and letters and words. This might incorporate speaking words that they may not know the meaning of already, like Amen or Father in Heaven, but that they begin to assign meaning to as they incorporate this into their everyday life. When it comes down to traditional texts in schools versus the texts that I saw in my community, I noticed a couple similarities and differences. I noticed that texts in schools often do not include as many external symbols like pictures and context clues that add meaning to the words. For instance, the arrows on the sheets and the arrows on the different signs are something that children might not incorporate as much into their everyday learning. Texts in the community are often also memorized as environmental text versus being able to read them letter by letter. Many of the things that I saw in my community were things that children would recognize from just having a glance at or looking at versus something that they would read letter by letter. Just like piano music, some people can play the piano by sound, while others have to look at the text to read and understand the symbols for the music. In this way, children might look at a word or a picture or a logo and understand its meaning based on the memorization they've already done. I also noticed that texts in and outside of schools include familiar topics to children, such as the library or the church or different things that they may study. Children in this way don't realize that they're reading in the community as much as they are. When they're looking at that bulletin board or that trail map sign, they may not think that they're reading, but they truly are. The three big ideas that I drew from this were how can reading something like music become a literacy children learn in addition to reading language? I noticed that children in this way would have to be looking at music and might not understand the symbols, but might learn to understand the text and the symbols together, just like they might learn to read a page of language. Another question I had was how did this experience impact my ideas about teaching? I noticed that once I became familiar with everything in the city that there was to read, I became a lot more aware that students have a lot to look at and absorb every day, and we can't assume that they understand it. In this way, we must teach them the context, the informational cues, the clues, the numbers, and the text, in addition to the simple things that we think that they already understand. The third question I had was how does a certain community differ to the school community that students experience? I think that it's really important that we incorporate what they're learning in the classroom to what they're experiencing in real life. If there's a polar opposite between the kind of textbooks they're reading in the classroom and the street signs and the signs that they're reading in everyday life, they're probably not going to make that connection that they need to be aware of their surroundings and observing things in everyday life to make things more interesting in the classroom and things more interesting when they're not in the classroom. If they're able to find the connection between reading the sign that says Manila Drive, in addition to reading the title of the textbook, they might be more willing to combine the two and to be knowing that they're reading at all times. I think in my classroom, I want to make sure I incorporate things from the outside world, not just the strictly curriculum-based material. By incorporating things from the city they live in, from the books that they're reading, the shows they're watching, the grocery stores they're going to, it can incorporate this idea that the students are always reading and always aware of the community around them.